Welcome back. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic in zoology, and that's all about related with blood clotting. What does this blood clotting mean? What is the mechanism behind this blood clotting? What is the role of vitamin K in the blood clotting? There are different blood clotting factors involved in the blood clotting. We are going to discuss all these things in this lecture. Okay, let us discuss the things. The first point, you will keep in mind that what does blood clotting actually mean? Blood clotting is also called as blood coagulation. So this is also called as blood coagulation. And blood clotting is actually a mechanism that is responsible for the conversion of fluid state of the blood into the gel state. You know, we have the blood. Blood is simply defined as a fluid connective tissue. When this blood comes in contact with the air, it gets converted into the gel state. Now, the conversion of this fluid state of the blood into the gel state is actually known as the blood clotting, which is also called as blood coagulation. And if we will look towards the, for example, this is our blood vessel. This is, for example, our blood vessel. And an injury has occurred here, for example, this is a site where an injury has occurred. Now, after some time, the blood flow automatically gets stopped. The mechanism which is actually responsible for the stoppage of blood flow from a site where an injury has occurred is actually called as the blood clotting, which is also known as blood coagulation. Now, the question arises, what does actually clot mean? What is the meaning of clot? Clot, you will always keep in mind, clot is also known as the thrombus. It is also called as a thrombus. Now, what is actually the composition of the clot? Clot is actually made up of these mesh-like threads. These mesh-like threads are actually known as, this mesh-like thread is actually known as the fibrin strands. These are actually these are called as the fibrin strands. And within these fibrin strands, what are actually trapped? Special types of cells are trapped there. Say for example, this is the red blood cell. This is, for example, the white blood cell. This is, for example, the platelet. So these cells get trapped inside these fibrin strands and they form a structure, and that structure is actually called as the clot. This is actually called as a clot. तो जब भी बेटा फॉर एग्जांपल यहाँ पर बेटा इंजरी आती है, तो इंजरी के बाद क्या होता है बेटा कि ब्लड फ्लो स्टार्ट हो जाता है. आफ्टर सम टाइम ये जो ब्लड फ्लो होता है बेटा, ये ऑटोमेटिकली स्टॉप हो जाता है और वहां पर ब्लड की क्लॉटिंग हो जाती है. क्लॉट का मतलब क्या हुआ कि वहां पर ये स्पेशल टाइप ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर बनेगा और इस स्ट्रक्चर को हम बेटा बोलेंगे क्लॉट. सो क्लॉट इज अ स्ट्रक्चर दैट इज मेड अप ऑफ, अगर मैं लिखूं क्लॉट इज इक्वल टू, इट इज मेड अप ऑफ फिब्रिन स्ट्रैंड्स. It is made up of fibrin strands plus the cells of the blood, like that of the red blood cells, like that of the beta white blood cells, and like that of the beta platelets. So they form this very important structure, and that structure is actually called as the clot. Second point, you will always keep in mind that the main aim of the blood clotting is what? The main aim of the blood clotting is to maintain hemostasis. That is called as the hemostasis. Hemostasis actually means what? Hemostasis is actually a mechanism that is responsible for the stoppage of blood. Now, there are two types of hemostasis. One is called as the primary hemostasis. This is called as the primary hemostasis, and second one is called as the secondary hemostasis. Now, let us see what happens during the primary hemostasis. During primary hemostasis, what happens? Formation of platelet plug occurs. So this is called as the platelet plug. What are actually, you are aware about what are actually platelets? Platelets are also known as the thrombocytes, and they are the cells present in our blood that are responsible for the blood clotting. So the aggregation of the so the aggregation of these platelet cells creates a new structure, and that structure is called the platelet plug. For example, if I will show you, for example, like that, for example, this is again a blood vessel, this is again a blood vessel. For example, here this has been a cut has occurred here. Okay, now these cells start accumulating there. These cells are actually what? These cells are actually platelets. These are actually platelets. So the aggregation of these platelets form another very important structure. This is actually called as the platelet plug. This is actually called as the platelet plug. So this actually happens during the first stage when an injury occurs. So this platelet plug is actually initially responsible for stopping the flow of the blood. It is responsible for stopping the flow of blood. Another type of the hemostasis is called secondary hemostasis. During secondary hemostasis, what happens? Association, or we can say aggregation of blood clotting factors takes place. So if I write down here, this is secondary, though here I will write down it is secondary hemostasis. So during secondary hemostasis, what actually happens? That aggregation means assembly of what happens? Aggregation or the assembly of special types of proteins occurs, and those proteins are actually called as the blood clotting factors. So I write down here aggregation of this, what we call as the blood clotting factors occur, or I can say formation of fibrin strands takes place. So this actually happens during the secondary this hemostasis. Next point, you will always keep in mind that if we look towards the key players that are actually responsible for the blood clotting, what are those actually called? Those are actually called as the blood clotting. Those are actually called as blood clotting factors. And these blood clotting factors, you will always keep in mind, these blood clotting factors are actually proteins. These are actually proteins which are 13 in number. They are always 13 in number. And majority among these 13 blood clotting factors are formed from the liver. They are formed from the liver. In the liver, we have special types of the cells. Those cells are actually called as the what? Those are actually called as the hepatocytes. And these hepatocytes are the cells that are responsible for the synthesis of these blood clotting factors. Now, we will see what is the role of vitamin K in the blood clotting. You know, whenever this vitamin K, this is our vitamin K. This vitamin K is the vitamin that is also responsible for the blood clotting. Let us see what actually it does. It actually helps us in the formation of, it is a vitamin that actually helps us in the formation of blood clotting factors in liver. So this is actually the role of, like that of the blood clotting factor second, like that of the fourth, so on and so on. So the role of vitamin K in the blood clotting is that this vitamin K helps us in the synthesis of, or I can say that this vitamin K helps us in the formation of blood clotting factors. Okay, now let us move ahead. If we will look towards these blood clotting factors, if we look towards these blood clotting factors, as I told you, these are 13 in number, and all these blood clotting factors, you know, they are actually synthesized in an inactive form, and that inactive form of the enzymes are called as the proenzymes. They are also called as the zymogens. So for example, I will write down here, this is for example liver has produced these 13 blood clotting factors. But these 13 blood clotting factors are not produced in an active form. Rather, they are produced in an inactive form. They are produced in an inactive form. and later on they get activated into their activated forms. Like that, for example, you might have heard about an important enzyme that is produced from our stomach, that is called pepsinogen. So pepsinogen is also an inactive enzyme. It is also called as the proenzyme, also called as the zymogen. So this pepsinogen is later on acted upon by the HCl, and HCl converts this pepsinogen into the pepsin form, and pepsin is the active form of the pepsinogen. Same is the case, your liver has produced these blood clotting factors, but these blood clotting factors are not produced in an active form, rather they are produced in an inactive form, and the inactive form of the enzymes are what called, they are called as the zymogenous. They are called as the zymogenous, or the another name is they are also called as the proenzymes. They are also called as the proenzymes. Later on they are activated into their functional forms. So that's why I have write down that the key players responsible for the blood clotting are called the blood clotting factors, which are mainly proteins and are 13 in number. Then I have mentioned at the point that they are mainly produced from liver. Most of the blood clotting factors are formed in an inactive form, and that inactive form is known as a proenzyme, or they are also called as the zymogenous. This is the most important point you will always remember. Okay, now let us move ahead. Now we will see that this blood clotting, as I said, that there are 13 factors which are responsible for the blood clotting. Let us see those 13 blood clotting factors. This chart actually describes those 13 blood clotting factors. This is called the blood clotting factor first. This is called a fibrinogen. Then second blood clotting factor, that is called a prothrombin. Third blood clotting factor is what we call as a tissue thromboplastin. It is also called as the tissue factor. Fourth factor is very important. That is actually called as the calcium ions. So calcium ions play a very important role in this what we call as blood clotting. Now let us move ahead. If we look towards that, if the deficiency of, that is the most important point we are going to discuss, that as I said that there are 13 blood clotting factors which are responsible for the blood coagulation. Now if the deficiency of these blood clotting factors occur, then a disease occurs, and that disease is actually called as hemophilia. That is actually called as hemophilia. So what is actually hemophilia? Hemo is a term which is related with the blood, and philia means what, beta? Philia simply means loving. So it is also called as a hemophilia, is also called as a blood loving disease. And during this hemophilia, what happens is actually excessive loss of blood occurs, and that disease is actually called as a hemophilia. And the reason that is responsible for this hemophilia is the deficiency of blood clotting factors. Normally this hemophilia, this is most important point, that hemophilia is actually of the three types. We have the hemophilia A, then we have the hemophilia B, and then we have the hemophilia C. Hemophilia A is a type of hemophilia that is caused due to deficiency of 8th blood clotting factor. While as if we look towards the hemophilia B is a type of hemophilia which is caused due to deficiency of 9th blood clotting factor. And then we have the hemophilia C. Hemophilia C is a type of hemophilia that is caused due to deficiency of 11th blood clotting factor. So these are the three types of the hemophilia. Now the most important point which we are going to discuss is that if we look towards the hemophilia A and hemophilia B, the genes that are, as I said, that these blood clotting factors are proteins. So protein is actually what? A polymer of amino acids. And protein is actually made by a special segment of the DNA, and that segment of the DNA is actually called as a gene. So what I mean to say is that if I will look towards this 8th blood clotting factor, and if I will look towards the 9th blood clotting factor, the genes for these blood clotting factors are present in a special chromosome, and that chromosome is called the X chromosome. That is called beta X chromosome. So for example, this is the X chromosome, so here it is the 8th blood clotting gene. Here for example it is the 9th blood clotting gene. So when a mutation occurs to these blood clotting genes, then the person will suffer from these types of the hemophilia, like that of the Haemophilia A and like that of the Haemophilia B. That is why we say that these two types of the hemophilia, they are what? They are X-linked recessive disorders. As compared to, if we will look towards the Haemophilia C, Haemophilia C is not a sex-linked recessive disorder, rather it is an autosomal recessive disorder. It is an autosomal recessive disorder. What does that mean? That means the gene that is responsible for making that 11th blood clotting factor, that is not located on the sex chromosomes, rather that is located on an autosomal chromosome. At that autosomal chromosome, I am going to mention the name of that chromosome, that is the 4th chromosome. So this is very important. So again I will repeat down that Haemophilia A is caused due to deficiency of 8th blood clotting factor. Haemophilia B is caused due to deficiency of 9th blood clotting factor, while as if we will look towards the Haemophilia C, that is caused due to deficiency of 11th blood clotting factor. But the 11th blood clotting factor is located on 4th chromosome, while as the genes that are responsible for making that 8th blood clotting protein and that 9th blood clotting protein are located on the X chromosome. That's most important. Okay, now let us move ahead. Now let us discuss. We have two pathways that are actually responsible for blood clotting. One is simply known as the extrinsic pathway. This is called extrinsic pathway, and second one is this is called intrinsic pathway. Now let us see what is the difference between the two pathways. Extrinsic pathway means this mechanism begins when the tissue gets damaged or on external side of the body. For example, this is my hand. For example, an injury has occurred here, and the mechanism that will play a role here, that will be called as the extrinsic pathway of the blood clotting. And intrinsic means what? For example, when an injury has occurred on the internal side of the body, at that time another pathway comes into action, and that action is called the intrinsic pathway. So extrinsic, as the name indicates, extrinsic means if an injury occurs on the external side of the body, at that time which pathway will play its role? That will be the extrinsic pathway. Intrinsic pathway means when an injury has occurred on the internal organs of the body. Say for example, at that time which mechanism will operate? That will be called as the intrinsic pathway. So that's why I have write down. Second point, the blood clotting factor, during the extrinsic pathway, the blood clotting factor that is mainly involved includes the 7th blood clotting factor. So 7th blood clotting factor is the first blood clotting factor that gets activated when during this extrinsic pathway. But if we will look towards the intrinsic pathway, during the intrinsic pathway, what are the blood clotting factors that play the role? Say I have mentioned it here, it is the 8th blood clotting factor, it is the 9th, it is the 11th, and it is the 12th. So that another difference is that in case of the extrinsic pathway, 7th blood clotting factor is involved, but if we look towards the intrinsic pathway, in the intrinsic pathway, that 8th, 9th, 11th and 12th blood clotting factors are involved. Third difference is very important. Extrinsic pathway, it occurs very rapidly. That means that blood clotting takes less time during the extrinsic pathway. And how much time? 2 to 6 minutes. But if we will look towards the intrinsic pathway, it takes time, and it always takes 15 to 20 minutes. Let us now discuss the mechanism, how it actually works. This blood clotting mechanism. See, for example, let me choose the pen first. This slide is very important for you. Okay, let me choose a color. I will choose this color. Okay, see, this is the extrinsic pathway. So this is extrinsic. These are the blood clotting factors. During this extrinsic pathway, that means when the tissue has been damaged, the first blood clotting factor that gets activated is the 7th blood clotting factor. So that's why I have write down the 7th. A means what? A means activated. It is the activated blood clotting factor. So for example, यहाँ पे इंजरी आ गई, तो जो पहला blood clotting factor बेटा activate होगा, वो होगा आपका बेटा 7th blood clotting factor. ये सेवंथ ब्लड क्लॉटिंग फैक्टर जो है ये कंबाइन होगा। फॉर एग्जांपल ये आपके पास बेटा सेवंथ है, ये बेटा आपके पास सेवंथ है। ये सेवंथ ब्लड क्लॉटिंग फैक्टर किस फैक्टर के साथ बेटा कंबाइन होता है? टीएफ के साथ। टीएफ का इधर मेंशन किया गया है। टीएफ मींस बेटा टिश्यू फैक्टर। सो टिश्यू फैक्टर इज व्हाट? इट इज द थर्ड फैक्टर। तो ये कंबाइन होता है बेटा आपके थर्ड ब्लड क्लॉटिंग फैक्टर के साथ, ठीक है ना। जब ये सेवंथ और थर्ड, फॉर एग्जांपल देखिए आपके पास बेटा सेवंथ है प्लस इसके साथ कंबाइन कौन हुआ? थर्ड। ये मिलके क्या करते हैं? ये दोनों मिलके कॉम्प्लेक्स बनाते हैं और ये कॉम्प्लेक्स बाद में क्या करता है? ये आपके 10th ब्लड क्लॉटिंग फैक्टर को, 10th नॉर्मली आपका यहां पर ये इनएक्टिवेटेड है, ये X कन्वर्ट होता है XA में। XA का मतलब ये हुआ कि दिस कॉम्प्लेक्स इज एक्चुअली रिस्पांसिबल फॉर कन्वर्टिंग, आई विल राइट डाउन हियर इज 10th, आई विल ब्रैकेट इन द ब्रैकेट आई विल राइट डाउन inactivated. So it is the inactivated 10th blood clotting factor. It gets converted into this what we call as a 10th activated blood clotting factor. So the conversion of inactivated 10th blood clotting factor into its activated form occurs in the presence of 7th and 3rd blood clotting factor complex. Okay, now let us see. So here we have activated, this is the XA. XA means it is the 10th blood clotting factor that is now present in the activated form. This 10th, I'm going to write, this is the 10th blood clotting factor. It will combine with another blood clotting factors like that I have mentioned it here is V. V means actually, it is actually 5th. So it has combined with a 5th. Then another, that is called a beta platelet, that is called a PL. PL here means platelet membrane phospholipid. And it also gets combined with the calcium ions. Calcium ions are here 4th blood clotting factors. So this will make a complex, that means 10th blood clotting factor, 5th blood clotting factor, then we have the platelet membrane phospholipid, then we have the 4th blood clotting factor. They will make a complex, and this complex will be responsible for what? It will be responsible for the conversion of prothrombin. It will be responsible for the conversion of prothrombin. I will write in brackets, it is I means beta inactivated, so it has been converted into the thrombin. And thrombin is what now? Thrombin is what? Thrombin is the activated form. Again I will repeat. So here tissue has been damaged, injury has occurred. Once the injury has occurred in the blood, a special blood clotting factor has activated, that's called a 7th blood clotting factor. 7th blood clotting factor has combined with the 3rd blood clotting factor, and this complex has actually converted 10th inactivated blood clotting factor into its activated 10th blood clotting factor. Now this 10th blood clotting factor which has been activated here, it combines with other blood clotting proteins like that of the 5th, like that of the 4th, like that of the this platelet membrane phospholipid, and this complex actually converts this inactivated prothrombin into its this what we call as the activated form, and that activated form is called thrombin. So this is another point you have to keep in mind. Now once this thrombin has been activated, see this is now here you have this thrombin. Now this thrombin is actually now responsible. Now here we have the thrombin, so this thrombin is actually responsible for the conversion of fibrinogen. This is the fibrinogen. Fibrinogen I will write down here F, and on the bracket I will write down here I. I means it is the inactivated form. So the inactivated form of the fibrinogen is now converted into its active form, and its active form is what? Its active form is called fibrin. There is a fibrin. Once this fibrin has been activated, this fibrin is then stabilized. It is then stabilized, and this fibrin is actually stabilized by another very important blood clotting factor, that is called this what we call the 13th. This is 13th A. A means again 13th activated blood clotting factor. So fibrin has been stabilized. It has been stabilized by last, that is 13th activated blood clotting factor. As a result, a stable fibrin clot has been formed. How it will look like? It will be just like that. So these are the fibrin strands. So these are the fibrin strands. Okay, they form a mesh-like structure, and within these fibrin strands, what will be trapped? Cells will be trapped. As I mentioned earlier, these are, for example, the cells like that of the red blood cells, like that of the white blood cells, like that of the what? Like that of the platelets. And this structure is actually called what? This is actually called as a clot. This is actually called as a clot. clot. So this is the extrinsic pathway of the blood clotting. Now we will see the intrinsic pathway. Here we have the intrinsic pathway. Okay, now this blue color actually indicates intrinsic pathway. As I said, intrinsic pathway is actually a pathway that comes into play when an internal body injury occurs. Okay, at that time, you know, when an injury occurs, the first blood clotting factor that gets activated is called this is 12th. This is 12th. So this is a 12th blood clotting factor. This gets converted into its activated form. So again A. So this is the 12th. I will write down here it is the inactivated. Now it has been converted into what? It has now been converted into its activated form. Once this has been activated, this is the now 12th activated blood clotting factor, it then converts what? It then converts this blood clotting factor, and this is actually responsible what? This is actually called as the 11th blood clotting factor. This is also present in an inactivated form. So it is inactivated form and it has been converted into its activated form. By which blood clotting factor? By that 12th activated blood clotting factor. Okay, now once this 11th blood clotting factor has been activated, it in turn activates what? This blood clotting factor now it converts what? It converts now this 9th. This is the 9th blood clotting factor, and it is being converted into its activated form. So again, it is the activated form. So first we were having the 12th, then we were having this 11th, now we have the 9th. So 12th has been activated when an internal injury occurs. Now this has been converted into activated form. Now this activated 12th blood clotting factor, it helps us in the conversion of inactivated this 11th blood clotting factor into its activated. Now once this has been activated, it converts this 9th inactivated blood clotting factor into its activated form. Once this 9th blood clotting factor has been activated, so it is the 9th now, it combines with certain other, this what we call as the proteins, like that of the 8th. So here it is 8th blood clotting factor. Then again we have that platelet, we have then again platelet membrane phospholipid, and then we have this calcium ion. Calcium ion is what? It is the 4th blood clotting factor. Now this complex, it actually what does? It is the complex that is responsible again for the conversion of 10th inactivated blood clotting factor into what? Into its activated blood clotting factor, and rest goes the same. Then this activated 10th blood clotting factor, it will they'll combine with 5th blood clotting factor, again with the PL, again with the calcium ions, and then it will convert prothrombin into the thrombin, and thrombin will be then responsible for the conversion of inactive fibrinogen into its active form. Active form is again what? Fibrin. Then this fibrin will be again, it will be stabilized by that, this what we call the 13th activated blood clotting factor into the stable fibrin clot. Once this clot occurs, then it will completely seal that site where an injury has occurred. Thank you.